Good day and thank you for staying with ＳիվիլՆեթ. We've been live since yesterday covering the situation at hand that started developing since 5:30 in the morning yesterday and still ongoing, the hostage standoff situation where a group of people going by the name Sasnazere, the Daredevils of Sasun, are keeping at this point already 5 people hostage, police officers, including high-ranking police officers, and have clear demands. Well, I don't know how clear the demands are because the police force is saying their only demand is that Girar Safilian be set free. However, we've learned from inside information and videos that have come out from the police station that they have other demands, demanding that President Sarkisian leave power. And my guest today at the studio is Mikael Zolyan. He's a political analyst, and together we'll try to understand the political context, the local context of what's happening in Armenia these days. Thank you for joining us, Mikael. And my first question, it's been more than 24 hours. How do you evaluate the development of not the act itself, of the public reaction and the reaction of the authorities to what's happening?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a very serious situation, and I would say it's unprecedented in the history of post-Soviet Armenia. Though it actually reminds me the strategy or the tactics of this armed group, it actually reminds me of the tactics of the Armenian Fedayi movement, because it actually strikes me as a kind of a repetition of what we've read in history books, but of course in a very different context. And I think now it's a very dangerous situation, and it's a stalemate in a way that for the government it would be very difficult and dangerous to use force to dissolve this situation, because this might lead to very serious loss of life on both sides, and that's something no government would want to have in this situation. And for the armed group, it's also apparently, the way I understand what their plan was, they thought that this action would trigger some kind of bigger events, maybe public people going out to the streets in support of them, etc. And this hasn't happened. So probably, if that was their plan, this plan hasn't succeeded either. What they're going to do next, because okay, you can hold this territory for some time, but it doesn't lead anywhere. So I hope that eventually there will be some kind of agreement reached, and the situation will end without more victims. It's very tragic that there's also already been a loss of life, and there were people who were wounded, and I hope that this situation will be resolved somehow. But I think what's also interesting in terms of the public reaction, right now the public is very divided. Some people see this as an act of terrorism, some people see it as these members of this armed group as freedom fighters, as revolutionaries. Some people, a very common view is that people say that we don't accept their methods, but we support the goal, which is changing the political situation in Armenia. And I think that if this has happened 5 or 10 years ago, the reaction would have been very different. So it shows how little the current government in Armenia is trusted, that even in a situation where obviously there's been the law has been broken, and obviously there's been a violent attack on a government agency, there are a lot of people in Armenia who are ready to support that.
And speaking of the public support or the reaction, what's keeping those? I know there have been a lot of arrests, unlawful arrests. People are being kept in police custody for longer than they should have been. However, still, that should have angered people more in a way. Why isn't there a bigger consolidation? Public?
Well, I think that for the majority, actually, these methods of armed struggle or violence, they are not really. The majority of Armenian public doesn't accept these methods as legitimate, so I think that's one of the reasons why there's been no wider movement. But another issue is also that this group, it doesn't have a broad base of support. I mean, it's always been somewhat isolated, but also in Armenia we don't really have a wide, other opposition parties are also quite weak. So I don't think that now anybody is actually looking to trying to lead the situation in a direction of destabilization. I think everybody is thinking about how to solve this situation, because if this continues to escalate, this might lead to very dangerous events. Something that nobody wants, whether in government or opposition or in the public. So I think that's why everyone has been very careful not everyone, of course, some people were not, but the majority of the public has been quite careful. And I've heard a lot of statements from various intellectuals, some organizations, and I think the common trend is that people don't want to see this escalate into further violence.
Well, a lot of oppositional political parties are disseminating statements saying, yes, we understand and we agree that the regime needs to change, but just statements, and they're not turning into action, or there's no proposition of any action, united action for this. Why is that?
Well, I've seen some statements which are calling on the governments to solve this issue without use of violence, so I think that's already quite it's a useful position. I think it's people prefer to err on the side of caution in this situation, because not everything is clear. It's hard to say what's happening, why this is happening. It's hard to say how the situation will develop because it keeps changing all the time. And I think this is a situation when you don't want to be contributing to something tragic that might happen, because every word, every statement which is too emotional, which is not careful enough, this can lead to escalation, and I think no one wants that responsibility. And I think the government is also, in that sense, they're very careful. We haven't seen many public statements from government figures. We've seen some statements from certain law enforcement agencies, but there's no name under that, and I think that tells a lot, because people in the government, they also don't know how to deal with that, because it's not clear what's the mood in the military, for example. I mean, some of the members of this armed group, they are veterans of Karabakh war. They have a lot of respect among the military and among the veterans of Karabakh war. So I think for the government also, it's not as easy as it might seem. I mean, on the surface, yes, it's just an isolated incident. They have enough manpower to isolate that and to deal with that. But the implications, they are very serious, because you don't know, if you're in the government, you don't know whether you can count on your military or the law enforcement services in this situation. Maybe they will go over to the other side. So I think the government also doesn't want to escalate the situation.
Is it also that they're not sure of what the public reaction could be if the situation escalates, or if any of the members of the group is martyred or is killed? Because the general conception of it is that they're martyrs, not...
Well, I wouldn't say that that's the general approach. I mean, there are people who see them as martyrs, there are people who see them as criminals, and then there are all the positions in between. But
my point being was that in the worst scenario, if someone's life is at stake and someone loses their life, and they will be considered as martyrs in a way.
Yeah, of course. I mean, if the situation develops in a way that the members of this armed group are killed, that would be, it's also some of the members, they are respected. Members of the community, they're Karabakh war veterans. If this situation, God forbid, develops in a way that's solved with violence, it's not going to be very easy to get out of this situation for the government.
And another question, Mikael, the situation in Karabakh and all this talk of territorial concession, which is what got Zolyan into trouble, let's say, with the authorities, and which is not being talked about very openly at this point, but is this something under the context that we need to be talking about, is something that's keeping the authorities back from taking bolder action, since if the territorial concession comes to the forefront of the discussion, then the whole situation might change, and the public perception?
I think there are several sides to this question. First of all, probably this action wouldn't have happened, in my view, if without this, the whole atmosphere of speculations about probable territorial concessions, etc. So certainly that has added to the fact that the members of this group decided to do this action. Because before that, we remember they were advocating civil disobedience, peaceful means of protest, etc. And now, obviously, that's very different. So I think that's one factor that contributed to what we have now. Another issue with the Karabakh discussions is that, part of the legitimacy of the Armenian government, or maybe the passive acceptance by the society, even by those people who were opposed to it, but they didn't actually take active actions. There was some passive acceptance that this government, no matter how bad it is in the eyes of some people, still it has managed to keep the situation in Karabakh under control. It has managed to keep security of Karabakh. It has managed to keep the status quo. And that's one of the factors that stopped opposition activists or people who dislike the government from actions like the one that we have seen. After April events and in the context of all these discussions about St. Petersburg or Vienna, etc., this perception is changing. So now there is a perception among at least part of Armenian society and part of the activists that this government has not been able to ensure the security of Karabakh. It has not been able to ensure the military and political security of Armenia, and that this government cannot be trusted in terms of maintaining the status quo in Karabakh. That this government, that's the perception I'm talking. I don't know if it's based on facts or not, but there is a perception that the government is headed towards some one-sided concessions. So I think that's what contributed to the action that we're seeing now, and also to the public reaction.
Mikael, I know this can only be speculated, but the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh is behind every authority coming to power and behind every authority leaving power in Armenia. In this case, for the Sasnazerer group not to be using that, if they want the government to resign, not to be using the subject, what could be behind that? What kind of...
Well, we don't know what they're using or we're not using, because they didn't really have the chance to explain their actions very thoroughly. So we don't know, maybe if they had the chance to talk more, they would have explained this by the action that they're taking now by the Karabakh factor. I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Mikael, and thank you to the viewers for joining us. We leave you with some live footage from Erebuni.